Well, welcome to another episode of Digging Deeper. I am sitting here today with Pete and Julie Goodman. Pastor Pete, Julie. We made a significant announcement in our church yesterday, and so we're going to sit down today and talk a little bit more, share some details, some heart, some stories, and have a great time. How you guys doing?
Yeah.
Doing okay. I took a long nap yesterday.
He did. Long nap.
Emotional things.
I took about a 5-minute nap,
Yeah.
and then I was thinking of all the things I had to do.
She's like, I'm
so
going to go lay down. I'm like,
got up.
oh, me too. And then she laid there for like 2 minutes, and I
Power
laid there
nap.
for 2 hours. That's our marriage right there.
That's very true.
Incredible. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously significant moment yesterday. God been working something in your guys' heart for, I mean, I think you said specifically, maybe even up to a year or so, guys been working on it. But to sort of like hit that point yesterday where it's communicated church, family, and life. And so it's a big day. It's a huge day. And obviously God's got great things in store. And so for anyone who may have missed yesterday's service, I would encourage you to go back and have a listen to that. But Pete, do you want to maybe just reshare?
Sure.
Yeah, and details where we're at.
Yeah. If you maybe are just finding this on Facebook or something, you didn't watch the service, Julie and I announced yesterday that we're in the process, and that's probably an important word, in the process of a job to lead a church in Michigan. And it's a little bit of a weird process. It's not a weird process. We're in a weird spot in the process. And the reason is, as we've been going through the interviews and things with them, their process is to come to a point where the search team, the elders and staff sort of formally recommend somebody to the church, and then the church votes to sort of approve and move forward. But there's a gap between those two moments where they release all of our information to the church a few weeks before the vote in order to give people a chance to, creep or research our social media and things and all that.
No pressure.
So even though it's not official, we don't actually have the job yet. They could theoretically vote no. We felt it was important to communicate to the church, and it absolutely was true. Within a few hours, there were stuff all on our social media. People were friending us, reposting things. There's that church made a whole post welcoming, like it was good that we did it because people would have heard about it from someone other than us, and we didn't want that. So we made the decision, even though it's not official yet, and there's still another step in the process, to go ahead and communicate it.
I saw on the page, on the church's page, that obviously it had sermons and podcast recordings and stuff like that. But one of the sermons, which was the unexpected twist, I think was the title of it. Yeah. It went. I saw it jump from like the week before, like a couple days before, to now jump by like 100+ views.
Oh, really?
So yeah, people are definitely like linking in and having to listen to it, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I remember Brandon being in the situation, and I was more sitting where you're sitting, but having these like two groups of people, and you're wanting to communicate well. You're also wanting to balance things. It's important to us that we can share with our church what's going on and that they feel part of the journey with us and aware. It's also important that I don't want anyone at the other church to feel like their vote is some foregone conclusion. Their vote matters. And so I'm not like, oh, we got this job. No, so it's walking that balance is important to us. But part of the process is being open and transparent and giving them as much information about who we are as possible. And then part of our sort of leaving here is to give as much information as possible and help people know why we're doing it. And so, I mentioned yesterday that you and I just kind of talked offline. It's like, how much time do we need for this? How much time do we have for this? And it was like, there's only a small window in a service. So using a podcast like this is more long form. We can talk and really share more of the story.
Yeah. So is there, just speaking of the story, is there anything where if you had had more time yesterday and that you're like, I just really want to make sure the church knows this part of it, or here's this part of our heart, or whatever it might be. I know, Julie, you wrote down specifically, which I think was wise. Transitioning, obviously, I've recently transitioned from a church that I was at for 15 years to here at Rise, and it's a very bittersweet, happy, sad, emotional on every front. And so I thought, wise to write stuff down, but maybe in this setting, now that the information's out, maybe there's some more stuff that you guys would like to share, heart, anything specifically.
Yeah, for sure. Very specifically, yes. There's parts of the story that not only is it like, hey, it's just an announcement today, there's not time for this, but there's so much context and other pieces that if you don't fill it all in, you can misunderstand. And so I've talked to a few people over this past week and phone calls and tried to fill in some of the blanks. But the number one question that we started making phone calls this week, but even over the past month or so, there's other friends that I've sort of let into the process. The question I get over and over and over again is, well, if you felt called to be a lead pastor, why were you kind of like, no, I'm not, when the whole process was happening here at Rise? And that was always, it's one of those questions that if you ask me that in passing, and like we're small talking, I'm just gonna be like, it requires some space and some time. And so I did want to talk about it, but I thought the podcast would be the better place to do it.
Yeah.
So I want to step back and kind of paint a bit bigger of a picture than most people would know. I think I used the comment a year ago yesterday. It's longer than a year. It was over 2 years ago that I wrote in my journal, God is about to do something new in our lives. And he told me like change is coming. I wrote that in my journal, change is coming, I think in January of 23.
Wow.
So over 2 years ago. And I remember I was in the living room, my journal was open, my Bible was open, and I felt the Holy Spirit say that to me. And my first question back to God was, wait, change for me or somebody else? And
Brandon.
it was almost like he was talking and then just stopped talking. Like, wait, hello, wait, hold on, wait, change for who? Change for what?
Wait, what?
And the more I pressed into that, the more God did answer me, but his answer was, just be patient. I'll reveal it when it's time. And that's one of the hardest things to hear God say, because over 25 years of following him, I've learned to trust him and to know that he knows better, and he knows when it's time for me to know something, but I want to know now. And so Brandon and I had been in dialogue, and hopefully everyone watching this podcast, if you're newer, Brandon was our former lead pastor that we planted the church with. And just to give some raw honesty, but also hopefully do it well, I was feeling in my own heart like this wasn't something I wanted to do the rest of my life. And that was a weird spot for me. Like I was feeling like I don't want to say I didn't like my job, but I wasn't feeling content. Like the Christians love this phrase, a holy discontent, because you got to make it churchy. But I was feeling that. I was wrestling, and some people on the outside saw me start a podcast and write a book, and I was teaching on the side, and it was like I felt, in retrospect, looking back, I didn't know how to put words into it at the time, but looking back now, I felt a bit trapped because we moved here with family to help start this thing. And so there's nowhere I'm going to go. I'm not going to leave, right? Like, we're families here, we're connected here. And there's nowhere else for me to move to, because I'm basically executive pastor. Like, this is as high as I'm going to get at the church. What do I do? What do I do with these feelings I have? And so it eventually kind of came to a moment with Brandon of being like, Brandon, maybe God is just telling me there's something else for me here in San Diego. I don't know. Maybe I really don't know. And I'm like, I don't know that I'm serving you well if I'm not coming to work every day completely like loving this. And Brandon, just great friend, good guy to work with. When we actually had the talk, and this is where it sort of starts to hit home, I really opened up to him. He shared with me, I'm feeling the same way. And I was like, wait, what? And so we kind of had this agreement of like, I said, look, you in the big picture are more important here. Like, you're the lead pastor of this church. Why don't you figure out what God's doing in your heart, and I'll wait. And it was probably some of the timeline is fuzzy, but it wasn't more than a week or two that the stuff at Eastview Church in Bloomington kind of happened with their lead pastor. And the next day he came into my office and said, hey, their lead pastor resigned last night. They called me this morning, asked me if I'd be interested. And again, this was February of 23. So you're talking over 2 years ago. And I was like, wow, what do you think? And he's like, I don't know, but I'm open. I want to pray about it. And so I remember coming home and talking to Julie, like, hey, there's a chance that Brandon might leave. I knew God said change was coming. So let's just wait and see what he does. We didn't know that was going to be 13 months. It was literally March of the next year. So the whole time we're just kind of waiting to see what God's doing. By the time Brandon actually made the decision to go to Eastview and step down, and at that point, I would just say everything I said, everything I verbalized to the church was definitely true, at least from my vantage point and what I was thinking and feeling in my head. I was at a point where I didn't know if I was wanting to stay at Rise long term or something else. I still had a lot of those feelings inside of me. I was wrestling with, number one, well, if what I'm feeling is because of the position, then a new lead pastor coming in isn't going to make that any better. I'm still going to have these thoughts and feelings. But also, a lot of transition. Let's just kind of like not rush anything here. But when I would think about the idea of leading, and this is really where I get to answer the question, there were two things going on inside of me that, again, hindsight's 20/20. I can look back and say, I kind of understand what I was thinking and feeling now, but at the time, they're just, number one was, I definitely had some serious concerns, fears, insecurities, like all humans do, about taking over a lead role. And part of that was really connected to Brandon in many real ways. And I don't say that like he did something wrong. Brandon, like when Brandon left, people were really crushed and hurt, and trying to follow Brandon is not easy because he's a really talented person who does things really well. He's a very unique mix of relational and strategic that most people don't have. And so it was almost impossible for me to picture myself leading in his chair. Like it was like, that thought was terrifying and even non-emotionally like illogical to me. Like that's just going to be a train wreck. So there was like general fear and insecurity about being a lead pastor in general, because I knew like, I definitely couldn't do it the way he does it. But even more than that, even if I were to lead a church, I just do not want to follow him. That's just the honest truth. Like I didn't think it'd be healthy for me, for my family. So all of these things were inside of me. If you had caught me in a real honest moment, not in public, not in a microphone or something, I probably would have admitted that, yeah, actually I would love to lead a church. I do feel that sense in my heart of wanting to lead, of wanting to step out. But this is just such a storm right now. It's easier for me to just say nope. And so from day one, the first meeting I had with the elders, the day Brandon was going to resign, the elders met in the morning. And I said, guys, just be clear. I don't want this job. Not interested. We're moving forward. Let's have a plan. Don't even talk to me about it, basically. And they're like, well, you sure? Yep, I'm sure. And I knew that the healthiest thing for Rise City Church wasn't to get up and lie. And I didn't lie. I was very honest. But to just remove any and all questions right from the beginning. So I spoke very kind of over the top, right? Like, I am not wanting this job. I am not interested. And I did that because there was truth in it. I really didn't want the job. But I also wanted to make sure that there was no underlying, are the elders not considering Pete? Because that erodes trust in the elders.
Yeah.
It erodes trust in the process. So I'm like, I'm just going to get ahead of this, shut down any and every idea of anyone thinking that I wanted it and didn't get it, making people think there's a problem behind the scenes. And I knew that it would make it easier for the process of a new person coming in. If that person didn't feel like I was actually bitter or upset or wanted the job, I'm like, no, just shut it down. So that's why I spoke the way I did. There was definitely some stuff going on inside of me, but also it was true. Like I didn't want the job. And if you had genuinely asked me in February of last year, I would have said, no, I don't think I want to be a lead pastor. Then I took the interim role, and the next few months became this incredible challenge of finding that I really loved it, and some of the fears and insecurities about trying to be Brandon and not being Brandon ended up just not even, they were just things in my head that weren't even real, which we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Like you have these things like, well, what if it, and it's like, you start doing it. You're like, that was dumb. Why did I even believe that nonsense? So we get to June, July-ish when we meet you, you come on the scene, and we make you the job offer, which it was great. It's cool. And so that's when I called you and said, hey, just so you know, I'm wrestled with a lot of things. The most prominent issue though was when we got to that point, when you were offered the job, I had people coming up to me saying, oh, isn't this exciting? You can finally like let go of this and go back to your old job. And that became like this existential crisis for me. Not because I regretted anything or thought I had done anything wrong or that you weren't the right guy. I still didn't want to follow Brandon or pastor Rise City Church. But I absolutely did not want to let go of what I was doing. I loved it. I was like, I feel called to this. And so by the time you actually showed up, there was just something in my heart of like, I remember telling Julie, I don't know what's ahead of me, but I can't go backwards. And I'm not saying that being executive pastor is less. I just, for me, that was backwards. That was like, I know that God is calling me to the next thing. And now that I've done it for 6 months, I just can't not do it.
Yeah, and you were like super open about that in the early days. It was either day one or the first Monday. Day one might have been a Thursday, so it could have been the Monday or day one on the Thursday. But we just took a moment at the end of the day, and you're like, hey, I just want to let you know where my heart's at right now. So you're like super open, transparent about that, of like, you don't know what was in the future, but you're really prayerfully considering it's something you've been dealing with or wrestling with for a while. And then I think it was just a couple weeks after that. You mentioned the prayer retreat you went on yesterday, but it was just a couple weeks after that, right? In August?
Mm-hmm. So Brandon had a relationship with a retired pastor up in LA, Simi Valley area, who he had done some like just coaching, counseling with. And we had connected with him about something else, and long story. But I reached out to myself and I said, hey, I'm just needing some space to think and pray. And he's like, well, I have a retreat center up here. Just come on up for a few days. We can talk and meet. And he said to me before I went up, he said, is this you just getting away, or are you trying to hear from the Lord about something? And I said, yeah, I've got a question I'm needing God to answer. And so he sent me this packet with like multiple questions. And I spent, I don't know, a couple days typing and answering the questions and things. And then I drove up there by myself. And the first day, he and I went out to this retreat center and sat on this bench. And he just started asking me questions. And we talked for probably 2 hours. And I'm sharing my story. I'm telling him what's going on. And he's just sitting there listening. And then I think I kind of hit a lull. I'm like, so that's kind of where I'm at. And he goes, okay, let me ask you a question. And he goes, are you struggling to hear from God, or are you not actually asking God the question because you're afraid of the answer? And I was like, it's the second. He's like, so you haven't actually asked God if he wants you to be a lead pastor yet? And I was like, no. He's like, why not? I'm like, I think I'm afraid of what he's going to say. He's like, well, let's just stop what we're doing right now, and you need to go do that. So I was like, oh, okay. And he gave me directions to a trail that went up this mountainside. He's like, you need to go ask God this. So I drove over to this place. It's probably 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And this trail goes up this mountain, Simi Valley, where there's a cross at the top. I can look up and see a bench. It's about a 40-minute hike up. So I start walking this trail, and I don't pray at all. I don't say a word to God. I'm just kind of like, fun trail, look at all the pretty scenes. And I feel like I'm getting nervous as the closer I get to the top of this hill. And finally I get up there, and there's a couple like young kids hanging out up there. And I'm like, just stand. They leave. And now it's just me alone looking over the whole valley. And there's a bench there. So kind of take a deep breath. I sit down, Again, I'd planned a 3-day retreat, and this is 4 hours into it. So I sit down on this bench, and I'm kind of just whatever. And I've just heard the Holy Spirit inside say, "You can ask me." And I was like, "All right. Do you want me to lead a church?" And he said,
Did you ask it audibly?
"Yeah." I said, it
Yeah,
out
you
loud.
said it out loud. I love it.
And I heard him say, "Yeah, you can go home now." I remember the first thought that I had was terrible. It was, well, I got 3 days to myself. I'm not going home. But what the thought should have been is, oh, the revelation of the Lord. So I walked back down, and I called Julie, and I told her about it. And I don't know. I remember your response. Do you remember your response to that?
Yep.
You want to share it?
Yeah.
Oh, you do have a microphone.
I know. Yeah, no, I think like that whole process was, I mean, for me, I'm just sitting on the outside watching him go through all of this, and deal with these conflicting things. And I get the Pete that nobody else does. And I've known.
You mean you're stuck with the Pete that nobody else
No, I get the Pete that
okay,
nobody else does. I get the Pete that's open and raw and real, and I get to see all those thoughts and the things that you don't get to see from the stage, and the things that, that I just get as his wife. And so I, for years, have known that he could do it. I've known and believed that he, has everything that a lead pastor needs to have. He has so many gifts and abilities to offer the church. And why are you
I
smiling?
think we're just trying to hear your heart. I appreciate that. We don't,
But anyways, so that said, when he told me that, I just started sobbing, because I remember saying, I was laying in bed. He had told me kind of about the day and the weekend, and just those couple days, that was like this big revelation for him. And I was like, I know you can. And for the first time, I think you are believing it, and God has shown you what I've seen all along. And I think that was an exciting moment. That was August, mid-August, right? It was right after you got here. And from that point, kind of our thoughts and thinking kind of shifted. And like Pete has this incredible thing, which he just like the conversation, like, yeah, okay, you hear from God, and boom, there it goes, done, move on. That's what God said. And I've grown immensely in that over the years. But like for him, our lives have been dictated and steered along those words from God that he's gotten. And so when he said that the Lord said that, I was like, okay, here we go.
When Pete and I eventually talked, it was early October. We were at a conference in Dallas, and I don't know if you planned to talk at the conference in Dallas, or it just so happened to happen at the conference in Dallas. It was a church planting network that we helped support. But he told me the story, and I think I still remember what you said, because I was like, that's such a beautiful statement. You were like, yeah, so I told Julie, and he's like, Julie cried, and then Julie said, the way I remember him saying it back to me was, I've been waiting for you to see this as well. Like you've known it since forever now.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a beautiful, picture of like the church. And the church is beautiful because I think everything that and I speak to this, anyone in ministry, everything for the last 25 years or so of being in ministry has developed you into the person you are today, to step into the calling that God has for you right now.
right.
And so that like sort of brings us up to this like current timeline. So that was like, that was some time ago. And it's been, what is it, 7 months since that point? I don't know how long it is. But that's when we started talking. Okay, so how long when do you want this to, what's the timeline? What's it all look like? Which brings us to now. And so I think it's just, it's one of those where, again, it's happy, sad. I always want to celebrate when God is doing something incredible and new and fresh in someone's life, and also fully aware of the difficulty. So I'm sure people have questions like, for my wife, Megan would probably ask this question: how are the kids? Because I remember when we told our kids, how are the kids? How are the family?
Yeah. They're doing good. I mean, I feel like Kira, our oldest, she's 14. I feel like the Lord told her. I feel like she kind of put pieces together, was picking up on things. And as you know, Pete and I we've gone on these like nightly walks where we'd like go out for an hour and walk the dog so the kids are older. So they like are very aware of when we're talking about things that they can't hear. Yeah. And so we would leave the house because we can't have conversations in the house anymore.
I remember those days.
Yeah. And so we would just frequently go on these walks to like just talk through things. And so she picked up on that. She picked up on just a bunch of different things. And so just one night I'm sitting in a room and she just point blank asked me, "Are we moving?" And I didn't want to tell her. I didn't want to beat around the bush anymore. I said, "We are." And like, and you know, at that point this was like 6 weeks ago or so. It was very still up in the air and still in conversations.
We hadn't even been there yet.
Yeah, we hadn't been there yet. We were still, and so, you know, it was a fluid answer of like, Dad feels like God has called him to do this. And so we responded obedience, and that's what we do. And so that was very hard for her. Kira, my oldest, has been uprooted from school multiple times. And that piece is very difficult to think about doing for her again. She loves her school. She loves her friends. She is very happy right now. And that is hard. So she's also held that secret in. She's kept that in for 6 weeks now. And when it kind of started coming out this week to friends and family, and like, this week has been hard for her. So that piece I worry about just as a mom. Kellen, same thing. He came out and flat out asked us like days before it came out and before we actually decided to tell him, but he asked us. And so we just decided to tell him. And that was hard. He like wailed.
Yeah.
He wailed and cried and said, I'm not leaving. Don't make me go.
Yeah.
And then Camry and Carson, Kellen's 13, Camry's 8, and Carson is 11. And that we were like bracing ourselves for what that was going to be. And I
thought that would be the worst.
Yeah.
Because Carson is the most connected.
She's very social and she has a lot of really good friends. And so
she cried. And then we told her she'd get her own room, and she was fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to leave. I'll have my own room. Oh, hey.
Yeah, but that's just a picture of God's kindness in that, because when we went there in March, the Lord literally like handed us a house, like just worked out all the details, and we're still buying it. We're still buying it. He didn't like give it to us, but and God's kindness gave it to us before we told the kids, and so that really was a chance for us in the conversations when it was like really painful and hard, be like, just kind of gently shift the conversation, be like, hey, can we show you pictures of where God's going to have us live? And the Lord has given us this house, and here's your room. What do you want to do? And so like that was able to shift the conversation. And so I think that they're excited now. Carson came downstairs yesterday morning and it's like, Mom, 94 days till we move, and I get my own room, and can I design it? And can I pick out put clouds on my ceiling and all of the things. So
clouds on my ceiling.
Yeah. They're all things considered, they're doing okay.
Yeah.
And we're not to the hard yet. So
yeah.
And I recognize one of the, she mentioned it, one of the dynamics of this whole situation is we're talking about something that is, to put it bluntly, like my job, right? And so like for me, and you probably remember this, like, well, there's an excitement. There's this is, man, an opportunity, and I really I'd love to do this. Mm-hmm. And the move, the change is primarily for me going to be this massive change in most of my life, what I do all day, and it's exciting. But for Julie and the kids, it's like, well, this is just literally change. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's easier for me to kind of be excited and think about all the potential and new things. And I think trying to make sure that I bring them along, knowing that, well, for them, this is just, they love this church. It's not changing jobs for them. And also just the idea of like, even the difference of, there's this statement in Romans 10 where Paul talks about faith coming from hearing. And when you hear from the Lord, and you really hear from him, it's almost like those words just like lay concrete in your heart that you're ready to build on. You just, no, I'm going, this is it. But when the other people involved don't have that, right? It's like, no, I know we're supposed to do this, but Julie wasn't there. And even like the kids are like, why are we doing this? And so like Julie's process for coming to accept that this is God's will was actually a long drawn out process where I was like sitting on a bench on the mountain. Okay, we're doing this. And even I remember there were many times where she would say to me, she's like, I am with you on this, but my heart's not there yet. And especially when we didn't have, there was nothing. It was just opportunities and interviews and resumes. But yeah, God kind of brought you along the path differently. And there's a few things that happened in your life that.
Yeah. And we sat on our anniversary on September 20th at Cheesecake Factory. And I told him, I said, if God's calling you, he's got to call me too, because I trust you and we follow wherever you go and what God has told you as the leader of our family. But like, I also need to know that the Lord has called me, and he has. And that process looked very differently than Pete. Mine was more like a 6-month conversation between me and God. And like, I look back at certain seasons in my life and I see, there's overarching themes that I remember. And, when we moved from Chicago to Kansas and then Kansas to California and then, different situations throughout life that have been really hard and difficult, like how God spoke and how God did that. And I think what I'm going to remember about this season is just God's kindness in it, because it was a much longer process for me. It wasn't, I told him, I said back in September, I was like, I'm not there. I don't want to leave. I love it here. Like I said yesterday, I was made to live in California. Like that's what God had put that just deep love for this place in my heart. And I needed God to make it clear to me that this is what he was doing in order to be able to walk forward in confidence. And so, and God was so kind, and that's what I'm going to remember is just God's kindness. And it's just been this back and forth conversation. And I've known conversation with the Lord before, but like it's literally just been this long thing where I would get up in the mornings and sit and I'd say, Lord, this is heavy on my heart today. Like, what about this? And what about this? And I don't want to do this. And I'm struggling with this. And God would gently and kindly respond to me. And literally, like my journal is filled. I was going through this morning filled with like, Lord, here's where I'm at. And God would speak so directly to that exact thing that morning or that day. And like, and it was just like, okay, well, got that one, now this one, got that one, now this one. What about this? What about this? And so it was literally 6 months of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And God was so patient and so kind with me through this, walking me through what he knew was going to be this massive uproot. And there were specific things, and I can share a couple of them if you want, but like specific things that were like, okay, this gave me the confidence to move forward. Like I literally just have this picture in my head of like, I was on a walk and it was like, faith is like, literally it's like blind, like dark in front of me. But God's like, come on. Like I've really been focusing on Jesus as the way. And I get this picture in my head of like him turning around, offering his hand to me and saying, do you trust me? Like, will you come with me? And I have no idea what's in front of him. It's just black. But he's saying, I am the way. So grab my hand and let's go. And so, that's hard because you don't know what's in front of you, but that's what faith is, right? Is like taking that step. And that's what I want to show our kids and teach our kids as we're doing this. Like, it's going to be scary. It's going to be unknown, but we can trust him, and we do trust him because we're going to move across the country because of what he said. And so, and
some of that was also like in the, we're talking backwards here, but from the beginning moving forward, the feeling or calling in your heart that God says to lead a church doesn't then the next day turn into, oh, and here's where we're going. I mean, it was like 5 months of just like, where are we going? And one of the, when you get specific about this one, so I didn't do something super spiritual of like, I'm going to sit here in my prayer room and God's going to show me I just started applying. I
cast the net wide.
Cast the wide net. I used the same organization that we used to help you find this church. They didn't end up being part of it, but multiple, and then there's job board, so I put my resume together and I just started throwing it out there. And, some churches would reply and say like, hey, we think you're a good fit. Can we talk? Some would be like, we're not, we're looking for it, whatever, you get used to it. I got to a point, I started that after we talked. So the end of October. By maybe the middle of December, so a couple months had gone in, there were probably 7 or 8 churches that I was now sort of in conversation with. Like they were interested in me, I was interested in them, had maybe a phone call or whatever. And a couple of them I was like really interested in. And I remember this like one of the most prominent moments of this whole journey for me. I remember waking up one morning and getting in the shower, and I heard the Holy Spirit just speak to me and say, "You're going to get bad news today." And you know, when God tells you that, it's like,
Dang it.
I know. And I get out of the shower, I'm drying off, and I look down at my phone, and I've got an email, and I open it, and it's one of the churches that I really like saying, "Hey, you know, we're actually going in a different direction, whatever." And I remember the first thought I had was not disappointment or anger, or bitterness. It was actually like gratefulness. I was like, "Oh, God prepared me for that. Like I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay." And so I get dressed, I eat breakfast, I get in my car, I start driving, and I remember because it was Christmas break, I wasn't taking the kids to school. I remember I'm driving and I hear him say, "That's not the only one." And I was like, "There's more." And I get to work, and within the first hour at work, I get 2 more emails. One of them was more, "Hey, you were one of 2 great candidates, but we're going to move in this direction." And the other was just like, "You know, we don't think you're the right fit for this." And at that point, I'm like, you know, one of them I didn't even really care about, but the other one I really like that church. And then you start thinking, well, maybe, gosh, is anybody gonna, you know, like all those thoughts start going in your head. And what if the other 5 all say the same thing? And I've spent 2 months now, and so I'm frustrated. I'm kind of, and I a lot of times what I do is I'll go into the auditorium and kind of dim the lights and just put my AirPods in and just walk and pray. And so I'm doing that, and he speaks to me again, and I'm like, you know, I'm complaining a little bit, I'm grumbling, I'm like, "Oh, I didn't want 3 in one day," and he said, "Actually, none of the ones you're talking to are it." And I mean, just like this sinking in my stomach. I'm like, "Oh, don't tell me that." And I'm like, "Wait, are they all going to say no to me?" And I'm like, "Don't do that to me."
Can
Like,
I say no to them first?
Can I say no to someone, God? And he said, "No." He's like, "They're not all going to say no to you." He's like, "Actually, that's why I'm telling you, is because you're going to need to say no to some of them." He's like, "But it's none of them." And I'll just be honest. One of them was like a church that Julie and I like really, a location that we really liked, super healthy church. I was like, "Ooh, that could be." And I knew they were interested in me. And I'm like, "Wait, so do I have to like shut it down now, God?" And I remember him just being like, "Do what you want." So, oh, you know, I'm frustrated. And this is all, by the way, this is the same day. This is all the same day. It's probably noon at this point. And I remember, because I usually pray earlier in the morning. I go home for lunch and I'm grumpy. I'm like, oh, you know. I get back after lunch and I sit at my computer and I'm like, okay, so none of the ones that I've been talking to for the last 2 months, 3 months, can I look for new jobs? What do you want me to do? And I didn't wait for an answer. I just opened my computer and I went to a site that has usually pretty good jobs and posted 2 hours ago, Woodland Church, Battle Creek, Michigan. And I looked at it and I didn't open it. I didn't look at Woodland Church. I didn't go to their website. I just looked at it. And I said, "God, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. Should I apply for this one?" And he said, "Yeah, that's it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I clicked on it and started looking at it and sent my resume in, and they got back to me pretty quick. And we had a great conversation, our first conversation. And in the same week, I had another interview lined up with the other church that we were really interested in. And they were the next day. So I had my first interview with Woodland, and then the next day I had another. And so I'm sitting on a call with this guy. He works for Vander Blumen, which is like this big search thing. And he was super kind. He's like, "I think you're a great fit for this. I want to present you as a lead candidate. Like, I think they're going to like you." And he's talking about the salary and the location, this great place where it is. And I'm like, "Yeah, that all sounds wonderful." And the whole time God is like, "How long are you gonna let this go on?" You know? And I remember I got off the call and Julie was in her office and she's like, "How'd it go? How'd it go?" Because I did it at home. And I'm like, "It was really good. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it was like, wait, what's wrong? And it was just like, there's just a few things, but more than so I get back to church and same thing. I'm like, God, that church really looks, and I had this picture of, man, sorry, I'm rambling, but there's this movie from like the 80s. It's about like BMX racers, and these guys are trying to do these like backflips on their bike, and they have all these mattresses on the other side. And I remember this scene where the guy that's like trying to help him learn it, he goes, "You need to take away the mattresses." They're like, "Well, what if we fall?" He's like, "Yeah, but even if you land the trick, you're going to land on a mattress. Like, you're not going to really do it. You gotta take away the net and do it." And I had that picture in my head. He's like, "Are you going to take away the nets?" And so over the next couple hours, I emailed all the other churches, including that one, and said, "Hey, I'm not interested. I'm sorry." And I'd only had one interview with Woodland. I didn't tell them that. Maybe you're watching right now. That's the first time I said it out loud. I'm like, "No, this is the one. This is the one." And so we just let it play out over the next, every call, every interview I had, I just felt more and more sure this is where God is telling us to go.
I remember when you were wrestling with that, you didn't fully give all those details, but I just remember you talking about wrestling, and I remember you telling me that you had shut down a couple conversations you just said that you weren't interested, and the turmoil, like you could see turmoil in people's faces and hearts and stuff like that. But it's, you've mentioned already in this podcast, but this isn't 100% confirmed. The church still has to vote. But there's another thing that I think is really sort of beautiful, and it'll lead to a secondary question. When we had that conversation in October, I asked you a question. I said, "So what's your timeline?" And you asked me back, you're like, "Well, how long? How long do I have?" And I was like,
"When are you going to fire me?"
"Have as long as you want. What is your time? What do you want? You tell me what you want." Yeah. I remember it was like this funny little conversation, and I remember you almost, and you're not a sheepish person. You don't do things like scaredly, timidly. That's the word. But you were like, you said, "Maybe the summer of next year." You said it like, I think this is almost like you were assuming it was too much to ask for. And I was like, "Okay, cool." You're like, "So like June could work?" "Yeah, it works. That's great." And so we're sitting here now, and there is a high possibility, if the vote goes through, that little conversation of that, "Hey, June would be this, if the time for my family, once school is done," all those little details, that would be a beautiful time. And it's just really cool to be right here on this side of it and see that it's really close to being like, hey, that's the timeline. Like, it was a timeline from God more than it was just like a thought in the air. But
he had it.
You mentioned something, and maybe this is worthy of a podcast conversation if you want to, speak to this. Maybe some people are like, "Well, what happens to Pete if Woodland Church votes no?" And that's not the next step. Like, what's on your, I think the question everybody would want the answer to is like, does that change your heart that God's called you to be a lead pastor?
Yeah, well, I think hopefully just hearing the story I just shared is like, it was never about Woodland. It started with God saying you're supposed to do this. Yeah. I will say Woodland's going to have to say no to me. I'm going there if they vote for me. We are going there. Sorry. See you, Julie. No, I'm all in there. They're going to have to say no to me. If that were to happen, man, the first thing I'd have to do is just spend some time with Jesus. Okay, now what, God? It would hurt. It'd be a massive blow to my ego, like any human being would feel. Yeah. It'd be scary. It would terrify me. But it wouldn't change what I feel like. I am 100% sure God's told me to step out and lead a church. I am confident and feel good about it being Woodland. Yeah. But I wouldn't throw away God's call in my life if they, and I also, people have free will. I don't like that. Yeah. I mean,
I think it's good for just people to know that. Again, it's just that constant reminder. You're not running from anything. You're not running from Rise. You're running to the call of God on this next step of
the hardest thing, honestly, outside of the family dynamic would be, we've basically offered my job to someone else. I'm like, "Hey, Jeremy, you have to hold on, buddy." So I, like even some of you, maybe some Woodland people are watching this. I don't know. You're like, wait, you guys already bought a house? We haven't bought it. We have an agreement that if the vote passes, they'll sell it to us.
Yeah.
But with Jeremy, Jeremy's self-employed. He runs his own business, which in itself is like, if he was quitting, if he had like announced to his employer he's quitting, the pressure on my shoulders would be immense. If it's like, hey, we need to push this another 3 or 4 or 5 months as I keep looking, he's got a job, right? So that makes me so if someone heard that, like, wait, so is he like changing all of his plans and you have a job? He's capable, I think, of waiting a little bit longer, but I think he's called too. And so,
maybe that's a good opportunity because we're coming short on time here at this point. Just for clarity, because I'm sure some people in the church know Jeremy Nix very well, and some maybe are not as familiar with Jeremy. The beauty of this is that there was someone in our church with ministry experience, preaching experience, ministry experience, had worked in church and ministry, that I felt like the Lord highlighted to me after our conversation. I felt like the Lord highlighted to me as like, hey, this could be someone who steps into that role. The beauty of it is he's known in our church. He's a part of our church. He's known the culture, the heartbeat of our church for a number of years now. And so we started talking early on that if something was to happen, and he spent time with the Lord. And like you said, I feel like he's called. So for those of you who are watching, though, I think, or listening, just so you know about Jeremy, he's not just a random guy in the church. He's been in full-time ministry for 14 years, give or take. In his life, he's also done some other things. He's ran a business, and he's really well equipped for an XP role. He'll also share some of the preaching load. In the early days when he got into ministry, it was through preaching like school assemblies and different things. And
he was like a public speaker at like 18.
Yeah, so it's going to be honestly, I just feel like God knew what was happening. God had all the plans in place, and God's not surprised by any of this. So we'll talk more about Jeremy in a future. Like, we'll introduce him. We'll probably sit down and do a podcast together, and he could share more of his story. But just for those who are wondering, he does have experience and loves our church and loves this region very well. And so,
and the thing that I was most excited about that, outside of him as a person, was, we have to acknowledge at this point, our worship leader is going to be an external hire. The only person internal who sort of fit the bill basically said, like, hey, I really love what I'm doing now, and didn't even want the job. So I knew that another new face. And so if it was like, hey, 4 brand new faces, so being able to at least do one position that's internal, I think is such a win for the church.
Yeah.
And even like the ability to, because I do a lot of stuff. I'm making a list of all the things my email is required to log into, and it's immense. So having a whole month to kind of just transition and train and make sure I think it's just God is in that. And I'm excited about that. But yeah, if we lose the vote in a couple weeks,
we will be recording another podcast and discussing the plans.
Be a counseling session.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I feel God is in it, and I don't want that to be a sense of presumption or pressure. I believe that the people at Woodland, their vote matters. It counts. They have a say in this. But I don't know. I feel good about it, and I feel like I'm hoping and trusting that they can see God in it as well.
Yeah.
So.
I will say this. I've only worked with you now since August of 2024. So we're 8 months into working together. But I said it yesterday, and if anyone from Woodland is listening, this is just unsolicited opinion on Pete Goodman. He's a good man, faithful, loves the Lord deeply, convicted by the word, lives a life honoring of God, wants to see people flourish in the ways of God. I think you're a phenomenal pastor and leader, and if it be Woodland or any other step, but your step as a lead pastor, I believe it's going to be just a phenomenal season. And Julie, you're an incredible leader. We all know that. There's probably questions people have about AIM and what we're doing there, because Julie started a whole ministry here at Rise called AIM about mothers. And it's good to know that we are going to continue that, and we'll talk more about the plans of that in the future. We're not intending to to drop that or not continue with it. It will continue on. But Julie, you're a phenomenal leader as well. And so whatever God has next for you guys, it will be beautiful and amazing. And if it be Woodland, it will be beautiful and amazing. And so we're prayerful and excited for you.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts, Julie?
Closing thoughts. I mean, not really. I guess.
Pete, any closing thoughts?
No, I'll close with this. If there's one thing that gives me confidence outside of obviously the Holy Spirit, it's just being married to her, honestly. I don't think I would want to be a lead pastor at all if I wasn't married to her.
Wow.
She is strength where I'm weak, and courage when I'm cowardly lion, and just a friend that I'm confident I can go anywhere and be okay because I always have my best friend with me. And so, yeah, I'm grateful for you.
Thanks, babe.
Awesome. Well,
With that, sappiness over.
with that, thank you guys so much for tuning in for another episode of Digging Deeper. We'd love to see you anywhere on the podcast or Sundays at Rise. If you're local East County, come out, check us out, visit, come say hi, and hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you or hear you next time.
Thanks, guys.